Hey everyone, Paul here from FamilyWheels.ca with another car review for your growing family. And despite what you might think here, I am not James Bond this week. I am not about to raid that great big dam in this very fancy looking sedan. In fact, it's a much more wholesome reason for being out here in Revelstoke, British Columbia this weekend. My parents came from one direction, we came from another. We met in the middle for Canadian Thanksgiving. But we did it in kind of a Bond-like vehicle. It's this new Lincoln MKZ for 2017. Not completely redesigned, but refreshed for this year. The company has had this vehicle in its line since 2006. It's based on the Ford Fusion platform. It was redesigned completely in 2013, and that's been tweaked here for 2017 with some new slick looking exterior looks. I like the back end on it. It kind of reminds me of the Audi A7 a little bit. The interior has been tweaked a little bit as well, and brand new for this year, a very, very fun to drive Lincoln exclusive 3-liter twin turbo engine. That's what we've got here in this tester. We've driven about 500k to get out here, and it goes, man. And it also has all-wheel drive on board, and we've hit everything. It's that time of year, from blizzards to torrential rain. The windshield wipers couldn't even keep up, and that all-wheel drive system coupled with this engine really did keep us in good stead. Let's take a walk around this thing, because the fact is Lincoln's really making a concerted effort to get away from that very old school crowd, mid-60s kind of demographic in terms of its loyal buyers, and trying to bring in some younger buyers as well. So can it work for families, and how does this new power plant run? That's all coming up this week on Family Wheels. So the MKZ falls squarely in the middle of the luxury mid-size sedan segment, which puts it competing against the likes of that Lexus ES350 that we tested for you about a year ago on the program. And while they both start at about $41,000, I think that the Lincoln edges out that Lexus in terms of basic standard equipment. There's some pretty good kit on board here right off the line, including all-wheel drive, a 2-liter turbocharged power plant, push-button shifter right up here on the dashboard, including push-button start. You get a rear backup camera, rear sensors for backing up into a tight parking spot, leather with very comfortable seats, by the way, a leather wrapped steering wheel. We have the new Sync 3 infotainment system, which is a big improvement over the Ford and Lincoln in-house infotainment system that was before this generation. Yeah, so nice to see that here on the base level of the MKZ. And we also have Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. So some pretty good kit right off the line at 41 grand. But as is the case with a lot of Lincoln and Ford vehicles these days, while the base price is pretty solid and has some excellent standard kit, there's still a ton of options that you can pile in on this thing. The plus side to that is that you wind up getting the vehicle spec just the way you like it. The downside is the price climbs really fast on you. So while we are in no means the top of the line MKZ here this week, which is the black label trim, we still come in at 68 grand, and that's because, well, we have this 3-liter twin turbocharged engine. That's a $4,500 option. Next up is this massive panorama sunroof, which looks gorgeous and is the largest in any luxury sedan out there right now, by the way, but that's a $3,400 option. Next up, the technology package at $2,400 gives you adaptive cruise control, lane keeping assist technology, collision mitigation braking. The luxury package, perhaps the most outrageously expensive edition at $5,500, gives you LED adaptive headlights up front. And while this is an amazing Revel audio sound system, it's considered the ultimate sound system in this package, it's still $5,500 for that luxury package. Then finally, the driver sport package gives you these sportier rims, contour seats, which are infinitely adjustable practically, and they are incredibly comfortable, but still this package comes in at $3,400. You add all that up and we are at $68,000, which is a long way away from the few extra little packages that were thrown into that ES350 that we were driving around and cost 46 grand, which was still a very nicely appointed vehicle. You you have to decide really what's important to you in this car, or the price is going to get away from you. But all that said, there are times when I get into a luxury vehicle and it just doesn't feel worth the coin. This car feels high-end. It feels much more modern and contemporary than that ES350, which is definitely focused, in my opinion, toward a bit of an older audience. This feels like a younger person's car. This carbon fiber inlay throughout the dashboard and into the door panels here looks really slick. The black headliner also really slick. It's got a sportier feel than a lot of luxury mid-size sedans that are out there right now. The center console has also been redesigned for 2017, which gives you a more intuitive, more streamlined kind of feel. I do like this push button shifter that's here on the dash too. It's been in the vehicle for a few years. We saw it in that Lincoln MKZ that we were testing a few months ago. It means that you don't have the clutter of a shifter down here in the center console, and you've got more room for storing things like cups and phones and that sort of thing. But you don't forego the ability to shift down into the corners. Both the 2-liter gasoline and 3-liter gasoline engines come standard with paddle shifters here on the steering wheel. However, in the hybrid model, you don't have these shifters on the steering wheel. You also don't have all-wheel drive. So while you do get much better fuel economy in that vehicle, if it were me living in a snowy environment like this, I would want to have all-wheel drive in this car, so I'd probably opt to go for either that 2-liter or 3-liter gasoline engine. Now, in terms of how this car drives, I'm actually floored at how good this 3-liter twin turbocharged engine is. It's new for 2017, and it's replacing that old 3.7-liter, which was the largest engine option that you could get in the MKZ. But I say, who needs it? Because this thing, I expected the MKZ to be powerful but kind of mellow, you know, sort of a cruiser's car, but it's not that at all. This engine, I'm glad that I've got all-wheel drive on board, because there have been times where I've started at a stop sign and really punched it, and I can feel all 4 wheels struggling to find the grip that it needs. This is such a powerful car. It's actually the same 2.7-liter EcoBoost engine that we really liked in that F-150 that we tested a couple of years ago for you now, but it's been tuned and bored out to give us 400 horsepower. Wow, is it ever fun. And it's also got continuously controlled damping, which means that it's constantly adjusting the ride comfort. It means that even when you're going through corners on these windy BC highways with a fair bit of aggression, it'll adjust things accordingly. It means that the ride feels really solid all the time. But you know what? The fuel economy on this, even though it is a very sporty car, is still actually pretty reasonable. Lincoln's saying this 3-liter engine should average between 9.2 and 14 liters per 100 kilometers, but I'm actually seeing numbers below that. This week, yes, I have driven pretty much exclusively on highways, but it's been pretty nasty conditions where the all-wheel drive has had to kick in. I've had very wet roads and also even slick, snowy roads, and I've averaged 9.1 liters per 100 kilometers. That's even with me kind of playing around and pushing it a little bit here in the MKZ. It's also really quiet in here. I have a hard time sometimes finding domestic vehicles that are as quiet as their European counterparts, but not the case here in the MKZ. On the same stretch of highway we always test our vehicles on, our decibel reader hit 60 decibels at 100 kilometers an hour. And that's not quite Audi territory, but it's pretty darn close, and it means that it's one of the quietest rides that I've come across since we've started doing that test. Here's something I'm not so thrilled about though. This car has a beautiful, sleek kind of roofline to it. It kind of reminds me of the Tesla Model S in a lot of ways actually. But the downside to that, I'm 6'2", and I have about an inch of extra headroom at play here, and that's despite the fact that I put this seat as low to the floor as I possibly can. So say goodbye to baseball hats if you're a tall person in this car, because it ain't gonna work. And then that sleek roofline continues to the back end of this vehicle and kind of slopes off toward the trunk, which looks really cool, but it means that visibility out that back window, certainly not as good as in many other vehicles that are out there. You couple that with the fact that on a really rainy day, there's no rear windshield wiper. So there were times where I was having a really hard time seeing out that back window. Then on days when it's gorgeous and you decide to put this huge panorama sunroof back as far as it'll go, and it actually overlaps with some of that back window, which means that again, your rear visibility is obscured even more. So a bit of a challenge there in terms of seeing what's coming up behind you. So that low slung roof that I was talking about in the MKZ, which gives it a very sexy look, continues to create some problems for passenger comfort here in the second row. You can see that even though the company has put a little bit of a pop out here in the roof liner, I've still totally maxed out my headroom here, and I'm bumping up against the roof. This is certainly not as comfortable as that Lexus ES350 in terms of headroom, and legroom is also quite challenged as well. One thing that Lincolns and Ford vehicles do too is that they often on high-end vehicles have their front row, their driver's seat position, slide back to create easier access in and out for the driver. But it creates a bit of a problem here for second row passengers if you're tall, because that seat all of a sudden is sliding back toward you and kind of pins you in. Seat comfort, meanwhile, is excellent, despite the fact that I'm feeling a little bit pinned in back here. Much like the front row, super comfortable second row seats too. And they're made with bridge over weir leather, which is sourced from Scotland and is really supple, but still feels like it would be fairly durable at the same time. We've got kind of multi-medium leather here as well, with a couple of different colors, some nice stitching in here, but these pinhole perforations are going to be a bit of a problem for keeping clean. I like to see back here that we've got heated second row seating, and we also have USB charge points for second row passengers, as well as a more traditional household style plug. That's cool to see. We see that in a lot of Ford products, and we also continue to have it here in the MKZ. Meanwhile, right here we've got a pass-through, which allows you to throw, it looks like probably just one pair of skis would fit through this hole, but nonetheless, if you've got longer items, you can still have 4 passengers in this vehicle without issue. Now let's take a look at that trunk, because it's pretty good at 436 liters of trunk capacity. There's a tiny little button here that took me a while to find for opening the trunk, and it's a auto open trunk as well as auto close. And you can see that our standard amount of gear here, a fold-up stroller, a diaper bag, a couple of bags of groceries, a soccer ball, and a backpack have all fit without issue. My one problem with storage in the trunk of the MKZ is this area here, which I believe is probably for structural integrity of the frame, and it means that it kind of blocks out a lot of what would be some storage, additional storage capacity back here. So on our road trip, it wound up being that even though we had a trunk full of stuff, that there was some blank space back here that wasn't being used, and that kind of is a bit of a pain, because with sedans, trunk space is always at a bit of a premium with families. Now, speaking of families, we do have a rear-facing car seat in place here, and while I thought that because it was a bit of a squeeze for me in the second row, we'd have some issues with front row comfort with a rear-facing car seat, we don't. 13 inches of front legroom according to our tape measure here. And that gives me tons of room in terms of legroom, but I also still continue to have headroom issues here, just like I have in all of the other positions here in the MKZ. Well, if Lincoln's strategy is to woo younger buyers into their vehicles with cars like that MKX that I was in a couple of months ago and this MKZ that we're in here today, it's working. This is not your grandpa's Lincoln anymore. It's super fun to drive around. This interior is modern and contemporary, a lot more than much of the competition that's out there in my mind. And this new 3-liter twin turbo is an absolute hoot. Another thing that's often overlooked with Lincoln products is the fact that they have a 6-year, 110,000 kilometer powertrain warranty, along with lifetime roadside assistance and a pretty slick program where they will pick up your vehicle right from your place of work when you go to get work done at the dealership. So there are a couple of things there in terms of convenience that certainly make this stand out compared to a lot of the competition. But you know, I've been saying this for a long time now, sedans just aren't the most practical of choice for families. They don't give you a heck of a lot of room. That's why the crossover and SUV segment has just exploded over the last 20 years. We're a small family and we don't pack particularly heavy either, but even still, for a 3-day road trip, we packed this thing to the gills. I'd like to know what your thoughts are. Can you make a sedan work? What do you think of this new refresh in the MKZ? Would you go for this 3-liter twin turbocharged engine? You can leave a comment below, and then you can check out our report card on this vehicle for a bullet point take on what we think of the MKZ at familywheels.ca. Next week on the program, we are heading east all the way to Quebec City to see the new Nissan Titan gasoline engines and see how they stack up in this really competitive half-ton pickup truck segment here in North America. So make sure to check that out in about 7 days. We'll see you next week in historic Quebec City.